You're listening to Quorum Radio.
He didn't seem to be in a rush. Why
Well,
would he
as I
bring his
say,
dog?
they were waiting for him to arrive to send out Oswald, and there was a suspicious horn. If you watch the tape of it, right
Yeah.
as Oswald is coming out, they blow a horn as a kind of a signal, and Ruby pops out from behind one of these two policemen, Harrison, and he shoots him. And it was a terrible lapse of security. And also, they should have
Oh yeah.
transferred Oswald in the middle of the night, which is what they originally were thinking of doing. And there were rumors that he was going to be shot. And there was even a story that Ruby himself may have called the police station to say somebody's going to shoot Oswald. Ruby showed a lot of signs of distress that weekend. He was extremely agitated and stressed, and his friends said he was acting very strangely. And he was
I think
stalking
they.
Oswald too in the police station on Friday night. He was there when Oswald had his press conference. And they also
Sure.
said that when he shot Oswald, he suddenly relaxed. He looked, contrary to when you say seemed relaxed, he seemed very agitated until he shot Oswald. And then they said Oswald is dying. And he suddenly looked very relaxed, like he did his job, because he was threatened. They threatened his family probably and himself. And he also owed a lot of money to the mob. And so he had done his job, and he escaped punishment, and his family escaped punishment.
Sure. I mean, some people will say that. Well, wait, he was very distressed. That's 100% correct. Very agitated. He said he was in a. I worked up into a just emotionally overwrought. He apparently I mean, take it or leave it. They're very two dissimilar people, Jack Kennedy and Jack Ruby.
Yeah.
They had same nickname, but I mean, but he
Well,
was deeply upset about it, more emotionally upset than anything.
well, I mean, that
So,
was a story that he later admitted to somebody that he said, my lawyer told me to make up the story that I shot Oswald so that Jackie Kennedy wouldn't have to come to
oh
Dallas
yeah,
for
oh
a
sure,
trial.
that one I've heard. It's kind of like you wonder about that one, but he apparently he told a hell of a lot of people how he was just absolutely out of his mind with being upset about Kennedy being murdered. And so, which of course then lends itself to being the motive. He was furious with Oswald,
Well,
wanted to wipe that smirk off his face for good, just that type of thing where he just thought he was just a little punk, and he was explosive. I mean, Jack, I mean, you know this because you've done extensive research into the JFK assassination and Oswald and Ruby for sure, and the different people. The strippers will tell him he had an explosive temper. I mean, Jack Ruby. In fact, I heard a story about this. I don't know if came across this one. I was stunned. Jack Ruby was a kick-ass guy. He at one in the 1940s, before he became a soldier, he would go to North American Bund meetings, I think in Los Angeles, and beat the crap out of American Nazis.
really.
And not only that, but at one point, maybe in his bar, I don't know where, he gave a licking to a pro boxer. Jack Ruby was a two-fisted guy, man.
Mhm.
But he was an angry guy. He would, out of the blue, he would explode and push a guy down the flight of
Well,
stairs.
he would beat up patrons who were unruly, and he'd throw them down the stairs. And
Oh my gosh, Eddie! The thing about Jack Ruby was that he was very explosive,
he
and so
was a
I think,
disturbed character, but
yeah,
he
yeah,
tried to use his temporary insanity as a legal defense. He thought probably he would get off for shooting. He was arrested. He expected to be arrested, but they probably told him, don't worry. I mean, people will regard you as a hero, and you'll get off eventually. And I saw a lot of the telegrams people sent to him at the jail saying, "Hey, congratulations, you killed this terrible louse."
amazing. And
Very,
listen,
yeah,
no, go ahead.
very few people were upset. I mean, a lot of people in America and around the world were really disturbed. Mr. Tippett, Edgar Lee Tippett, told me, he said, I hated the fact that Oswald was killed. I thought that was rather moving because he said that now, a lot of answers were eliminated when
So he didn't like that.
no, he didn't like it. He was not a guy who wanted his son revenged. He thought Oswald had killed his son, but he was not a bloodthirsty kind of guy, and he wanted answers like most
Oh
Americans
yeah,
did.
man. I mean, the thing is that Ruby would see Ruby said he made statements like, I had to show that that a Jew could do something about it. He's proud
Well,
of the fact
he
he's
said a
Jewish.
lot of things, but this was partly an act, I think, that he put on certain things. And, I mean,
Right.
he claimed that he liked Kennedy and all that, but I mean, he didn't like him enough to go watch the motorcade, for example. I mean, that's kind of peculiar. If you like Kennedy so much and he's a block or two away, why don't you go outside and watch him? But he did a lot of odd things that weekend, and he made statements that were strange. And but it's consistent with the guy being stressed and acting peculiar. And why was he at the police station for the press conference? And he corrected Henry Wade, the DA, when
Amazing.
Wade made a comment about a anti-Castro organization, and Ruby corrected him. And Ruby had also been a gun runner to Cuba. He was involved in a lot of criminal activities with the mob. So I mean, he was the kind of guy you would hire to do a job like that. Doesn't mean that the mob was behind the murder of Kennedy. I mean, there are a lot of people who say, okay, the mob killed Kennedy. It couldn't be that simple, because the mob didn't have the power to control the autopsy, for example, or the Warren Commission. They couldn't appoint the Warren Commission to cover it up. And
Sure.
I mean, there are a lot of reasons the mob didn't have as much power as the military and Lyndon Johnson and the Dallas police, etc. The mob could do certain functions, like they were going to be used by the CIA to help kill Castro, for example. They were the kind of guys you could rely on to do hits and things, but they weren't the masterminds of the whole thing, I don't believe. And I think Ruby was a kind of a low level, but fairly, he was important in Dallas, but he was under the control of Carlos Marcello, who was the regional mobster guy out of New Orleans. And a lot of the plot was hatched in New Orleans. And there was also, there were a couple of local mafiosos that Ruby was mixed up with. But he came out of Chicago, the Chicago mob, et cetera. There were mobster fingerprints on this thing, but that was, I think that, it was a kind of a desperation thing. They had to get rid of Oswald, and time was running out. Dwight McDonald wrote about the miraculous survival of Oswald for 48 hours in the hands of the Dallas police. Oswald was talking, and we don't know all of what he said because they didn't have a tape recorder going. And
that to me is astonishing.
Yeah, it's terrible. It's terrible. It's such a shame. It's such a major criminal case. We don't know what he said. They didn't want us to know, and he didn't have an attorney to try to protect his rights. And
that one. But though, I mean, he wanted John Ept, who was I think legal counsel for the Communist Party USA, who had experience apparently dealing in cases with basically like sedition.
Well, he represented some of the Smith Act defendants. This was a kind of unconstitutional act that tried to criminalize being a communist, even though the Constitution protects your freedom of political views.
Right, including wanting to overthrow the U.S. government, and I think it had to do with something like that. And
Oswald wanted Apt as his attorney, and he tried to make phone calls to Apt, and Apt, I think, shamefully was ducking his calls that weekend. And he said on television Friday night, he said, I do request somebody to come forward to give me legal assistance, which is really kind of disturbing. And a lot of people around the country, lawyers and other people, thought this is terrible. Here's a guy who's not getting legal assistance. And so the head of the Dallas Bar Association visited him in his cell the next day and said, we could help you, we could represent you. And Oswald said, well, thank you, I might turn to you, but I really want this guy, John Apt, And,
I think he said, wait, did he say or from the ACLU? And he had, by the way, he had apparently sent in a membership card, filled out a membership card.
He was a member, I believe, of the ACLU, and one of the ACLU lawyers did go to the jail too and wanted to meet with Oswald. And I believe what happened was the guy from the Bar Association told the ACLU that Oswald said, I might call on you guys, but Oswald thought he had time. Oswald tried to make a phone call too to a guy named Hurt in, I believe it was North Carolina, who was
what was that about?
Well, we don't know the whole story, but this guy was in the intelligence community, and Oswald was trying to make a phone call to him, and they wouldn't put the call through. Somebody found the slip where Oswald was trying to make this call, and he was an intelligence agent. He was CIA and FBI connected, and probably Office of Naval Intelligence. He was a very, very interesting guy, 24 years old, and he had all of this history. Most 24-year-olds were, when I was 24, I was just messing around. But he had done a lot of, he'd been to Russia, and he was in the Marines, and he'd been to Japan, and he worked for the CIA and the FBI. And he was, I believe he was infiltrating the plot for the FBI at the time of the assassination. And I found that he reported to the FBI at least three times, I think, or maybe four, in November of '63, and they kind of tried to cover up how often they admitted to one thing. They said he took a note into the FBI office around November 12th, threatening to blow up the office, but the note was destroyed by the FBI right after Oswald was killed, so we don't really know what the note said. But the Dallas papers said that morning before Oswald was shot, they said he had come to the FBI. He had talked to the FBI on November 16th. And there was also evidence in early November. So I think he was keeping them apprised of the plot. He was a patriotic American working for the FBI. And then he didn't realize he was being set up as the patsy. The CIA did the setting up, but the FBI was very corrupt. So this Hurt guy might have been his cutout, in the intelligence community. If you're an agent of some kind, you probably have somebody you can call for help. If you're in trouble, you can call a guy and you could say, I really need, legal help or whatever this guy could do. We don't really know because the guy was never really questioned.
Right. Well, all right. Well, listen, Joseph, thanks for being on Quorum Radio again for this part 2 to discuss Into the Nightmare, my search for the killers of President John F. Kennedy and Officer J.D. Tippit. Remember, folks, Joseph McBride, author of 22 books. I guess what will be your 23rd book?
Well, I have another in the works, but the Billy Wilder, I believe, is number 22. Billy Wilder, Dancing on the Edge, I think is number 22. Okay. I've been very busy lately. And by the way, some of the things we talked about, I go into a lot more detail in my book, Into the Nightmare, because we have a limited amount of time. This was a really good interview, and thank you for having me on twice.
And my pleasure. Thank you for being on Quorum Radio, Joseph.
Thank you. We got into some good stuff, but there's a lot of this stuff is very, has many facets, so you can find more in the book if you want.
Positively. Sure, absolutely. And so, also, I mean, it's such an interesting background that you've done with Hollywood.
Thank you.
So great. Well, listen, thanks a million again for being on Quorum Radio. Hope to have you on again to talk about some of your books that having to do with the silver screen.
Oh, that'd be wonderful. It'd be fun in the fall when the Billy Wilder book comes out. We could talk about Hayes.